She walked onto the stage slowly, carefully, her hand gently resting on her grandmother's arm. The lights above were blinding, though she couldn't see them. She couldn't see the thousands of people watching, or the famous pianist standing off to the side, smirking in disbelief. All she could hear was the nervous hush of the crowd, and the whisper that changed everything. "She better not embarrass that Steinway," he said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. Laughter rippled through the audience, but she didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. In that moment, no one expected her to succeed. They expected a mistake. They expected a child out of her depth. But what they heard wasn't a child. It wasn't even music, as they knew it. It was a story. A storm. A soul set free. And when she played that first note, the room fell into a silence so deep, it was as if the world itself paused to listen. 12-year-old Amara Johnson had been blind since birth, but no one who knew her would ever say she lived in darkness. Her world was vibrant in its own way, painted not in colors, but in sounds, scents, and sensations. She lived in a creaky old shotgun house, on the edge of New Orleans' Treme neighborhood, where jazz music spilled from front porches like morning light, and every passing car played its own note in the city's unending symphony. She lived with her grandmother, Miss Eloise, a retired schoolteacher who believed that strength came from the soul, not the eyes. "Baby," she would often say, brushing Amara's curly hair back with soft fingers. "You don't need sight to see, you just need to listen better than most." Amara listened. She listened deeply. Her favorite sound in the whole world was the rain. To most people, it was background noise, a reason to stay inside, an inconvenience. But to Amara, it was everything. When the skies opened and the first drops began to fall on the tin roof of their house, she would rush to her spot by the window. There, she kept her old second-hand keyboard, half the keys chipped, the speakers weak. She didn't care. It wasn't about the equipment, it was about the feeling. The rain spoke to her in rhythms. It had moods. Some days it came like a whisper, a delicate brush of fingers across the earth. Other days it came in bursts, urgent, pounding, alive. Thunder to her was not frightening. It was percussion. Lightning crackled like cymbals in a hidden orchestra. She imagined the sky itself had hands, tapping and clapping and creating something only the heart could interpret. As the rain fell, Amara's fingers danced across the keys. She didn't know how to read music. She had never taken formal lessons, but she knew how to feel. Her fingers moved with purpose, translating every drip, every gust of wind, every roll of thunder, into music only she could hear inside her soul. Each time she played, her grandmother would pause in the kitchen, the spoon hovering over the gumbo pot, just to listen. Miss Eloise never interrupted. She understood something magical was happening, something she couldn't explain but could always feel. Other kids in the neighborhood often passed by her window and stopped to listen too. At first, they'd giggle or whisper, wondering how a blind girl could play without reading notes. But once they heard her, they stopped asking. One boy even brought his trumpet and tried to join in. Amara smiled and said softly, "You're a little ahead of the rain, but we'll catch up." Despite her growing reputation in the neighborhood, Amara remained humble. She didn't play for praise or applause. She played because it was the one time she felt fully alive. In the music, she wasn't the blind girl. She wasn't different or limited. She was free, boundless. Sometimes when the rain was especially heavy and the wind whipped through the oak trees outside, she'd close her eyes tighter and imagine a grand stage, a massive piano, a hall full of people who weren't judging her, just listening. And in that dream, she played a song no one had ever heard before, a song made of rain, of joy, of grief, of every emotion she couldn't find words for. But Amara didn't know that just a few blocks away, destiny was already tuning its ear. One rainy Thursday afternoon, as she played a soft, flowing melody, inspired by a passing storm, a man walking by paused outside her window. He had ducked under the awning to stay dry, intending only to wait out the weather. But then he heard her music. He didn't see a girl or a keyboard. He saw possibility. His name was Mr. Luvin, a local cafe owner, who booked live music on the weekends. He didn't say anything to her that day. He simply took out his phone, hit record, and captured a few minutes of her playing as the storm surged on. Amara never even knew he was there. And that recording, rough as it was, would soon fall into the hands of someone powerful, someone famous, someone whose arrogance would eventually collide with Amara's quiet brilliance. But for now, she just kept listening, to the rain, to the world, to her own unstoppable rhythm. The streets of New Orleans were alive with the hum of evening energy. A gentle breeze blew through the open windows of the Mardi Gras Café, and the scent of gumbo, crawfish, and Creole spices filled the air. People passed by in a swirl of laughter, music, and chatter, their lives woven together in the vibrant tapestry that only New Orleans could create. Amara sat by the corner of the café, her feet dangling off the sidewalk, fingers lightly tapping on her old keyboard. It was her usual spot. The familiar sound of passing cars, the chatter of tourists, and the occasional beat of a drum circle in the distance. But tonight, something felt different. The city had that electric feeling, before a storm, a hint of anticipation, as if the world were holding its breath. Amara didn't notice him at first. She was lost in her music, fingers dancing over the worn keys, playing a melody that seemed to capture the heartbeat of the city itself. The rain had stopped, just hours ago, but the humidity still hung in the air. A few drops of water dripped from the leaves above, adding their own rhythm to the performance. That's when the man appeared. At first, she heard his shoes tapping on the pavement, his steps slow and deliberate. She glanced up briefly, just enough to catch a glimpse of his polished black shoes and crisp black suit. A moment later, the sharp sound of sunglasses being adjusted caught her attention. He wasn't looking at her, but she could tell by the way he stood that he was sizing her up. He was tall, well-dressed, and radiated an air of importance. People on the street passed by without paying him much mind, but Amara could sense that others were stealing glances at him. She didn't know who he was yet, only that his presence felt different. She continued playing, ignoring the man. After all, she'd played in front of countless strangers. Most of them didn't stay long enough to listen. They might have thrown a coin in her jar or complimented her in passing, but few actually understood what she was doing. Then she heard him chuckle. "Cute," he muttered under his breath. "But talent takes more than feeling your way around a keyboard." Amara's fingers faltered, and a chill ran through her. Her smile faded, for a moment, the warm connection she felt with her music slipping away like sand through her fingers. She didn't respond. She had learned long ago not to let words shake her, not even harsh ones. Her grandmother had taught her that silence could be just as powerful as sound. But it still stung. The man stood there for a while, tapping his foot as if he were waiting for something. Finally, he turned and walked away, a smug expression on his face, as if he had already dismissed her. His footsteps echoed in the distance. But Amara didn't let them affect her. She took a deep breath, and began playing again. She wasn't playing for him. She never. Little did she know, that encounter would become a turning point. Inside the cafe, the owner, Mr. Jace, had been watching the entire scene from the counter. He had seen Amara play countless times, and he admired her resilience. It wasn't just about her music, it was her heart. No matter what life threw at her, she kept playing. He had always believed there was something special about her, something the world had yet to see. The interaction with the man had caught his attention too. He had overheard the rude comment, and had seen the flash of hurt in Amara's eyes, even if she didn't show it outwardly. He knew that someone like her, someone so genuine, deserved more than just passing glances. He reached for his phone, and pulled up the video he had secretly recorded of Amara playing a week ago. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, the music flowing like a river, smooth and pure. There was something raw in her playing, something he couldn't describe, but he felt it deep in his chest. He knew then that he couldn't let this go unnoticed. Without hesitation, he sent the video to the New Orleans Grand Music Gala, a prestigious event held annually to celebrate the finest musical talent in the city. A few days later, Amara's life changed forever. An envelope arrived at her grandmother's house, sealed in gold. The handwriting on the front was elegant, the kind reserved for official invitations. Inside, Amara found a letter from the gala organizers. "Dear Miss Johnson, we are honored to invite you to perform at the New Orleans Grand Music Gala this year. Your unique sound has caught the attention of our panel, and we believe you possess an undeniable talent that will inspire our audience. Your performance will be alongside some of the finest musicians in the world, including the legendary Victor Dubois." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The Victor Dubois, the world-renowned pianist, the man who filled concert halls with his perfect melodies, the man who had once mocked her from a distance. She couldn't believe it. Her hands shook as she read the words again. Her grandmother's face lit up with pride and excitement, as she realized what this meant. It wasn't just an invitation to perform, it was a chance to be seen, to show the world who she was. Not the blind girl, not the girl with the old keyboard, but Amara, the musician, who listened to the rain. For the first time in her life, Amara realized that the world had been listening too. The night of the New Orleans Grand Music Gala was nothing short of electric. The city had never seen such an assembly of talent, with the grand hall of the Royal Crescent Theatre packed to the brim. Spotlights danced across the polished floor like lightning, and cameras flashed at every turn, capturing the glamour, the elegance, the promise of greatness. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. People had traveled from all over the world, eager to witness the best in the business. Musicians, critics, and celebrities all filled the audience, their murmurs barely audible above the steady hum of excitement. This was a night where legends would be born, or broke. The evening star was none other than Victor Dubois, the world-renowned pianist, whose mastery of the keys was legendary. A man whose hands seemed to speak in a language all their own, who could make even the most complex pieces sound effortless. His reputation preceded him, his performances a dazzling display of technical skill and showmanship. When it was finally his turn to perform, the crowd hushed. Victor, dressed in a tailored black suit, strode confidently to the grand Steinway piano that sat at the center of the stage. His fingers hovered over the keys, and then like lightning, they struck, each note a bolt of pure, unbridled brilliance. He moved with an almost otherworldly grace, his music soaring through the air, commanding the attention of every single person in the room. The crowd cheered, roaring with approval, as his performance reached its stunning crescendo. But as the applause rang out, the night was far from over. Next up was Amara Johnson. The stage was momentarily silent, as she walked onto the platform, her grandmother, Miss Eloise, guiding her gently by the arm. Amara was dressed in a simple, yet elegant black dress, nothing too extravagant, but enough to make her feel as though she belonged. As the spotlight swung in her direction, she stood tall, feeling the eyes of the crowd descend upon her, though she couldn't see them. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat in her chest, thudding loud enough to drown out the hushed whispers that buzzed through the room. Amara had performed in front of crowds before, but never anything like this. Never in a place so grand, where the air felt thick with expectation. She felt the weight of every stare, every question, hanging in the air like smoke. The audience was unsure. Could she really do that? Was she truly worthy of sharing the stage with the likes of Victor Dubois? Her grandmother squeezed her hand gently, offering the silent support only a loved one could. Amara took a deep breath. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself. With the familiar click of the piano bench under her, she sat at the grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. The silence in the hall felt suffocating, until it was broken by a single, unmistakable voice. Victor Dubois, standing backstage near the edge of the stage, chuckled. His smirk was evident, even in the darkness of the shadows. He leaned against the wall, watching her intently as the audience shifted, their attention split between the two performers. Just loud enough for the microphone to pick up, he muttered with a sneer, his words dripping with sarcasm. She better not embarrass that Steinway. The words hung in the air like a challenge. His tone was thick with contempt, the kind that only a man who had tasted success for far too long could afford. The room went still, then as if everyone had collectively inhaled at once, a gasp rippled through the audience. Amara froze for a moment, her fingers quivering above the key. Her heart sank. She had felt the harshness of his words, like ice cutting through the warmth of her confidence. Her mind flashed back to the street cafe, to his mocking tone, to the sneer in his eyes. Cute, he had said back then. Talent takes more than feeling your way around a keyboard. Her grandmother's reassuring touch brought her back to the present. Amara's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't pull away from the piano. She couldn't afford to. The world was watching, and she had a story to tell. The hosts were visibly stunned, their faces etched with discomfort as they scrambled to recover from Victor's outburst. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some were shocked, others were unsure of how to respond. Amara's performance hadn't even started, and already, they were questioning her. Victor's smirk remained. He was confident, too sure of himself, as though no one, least of all this blind girl, could possibly challenge his throne. But Amara wasn't there to challenge him. She was there to be herself. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling for a brief moment, but then something inside her clicked. She wasn't going to let him steal her moment. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her she didn't belong. Slowly, She placed her fingers on the keys, and the first note, the music started softly, like the whisper of the rain that she loved so much. Her fingers caressed the keys, finding their rhythm, weaving through the soft melody. The audience fell into a stunned silence. Victor, watching from the wings, smirked a little less now, his eyes narrowing. He'd expected something crude, something rough, but this was different. The music wasn't like anything he'd ever heard before. It was raw, unrefined, yet somehow perfect in its own way. Amara's hands danced across the keys, and with each note, her confidence grew. She played not for the applause, not for the critics, but for the music itself, for the rhythm of the rain, the echoes of the storms, and the sound that only she could hear. The crowd was mesmerized. What they heard was more than just a melody, it was a piece of her soul, a sound they could feel deep in their bones. And in that moment, the world would never look at Amara the same way again. Amara's fingers rested on the keys for just a moment, and the world held its breath. She had felt the weight of the mockery, the weight of the crowd's gaze. But none of it mattered now. The soft echo of the piano was the only thing that mattered, the only thing she could trust. And then, she played. At first it was as if the piano itself was shy. Her fingers pressed gently against the keys, each note delicate, like raindrops tapping against a window pane. The music was tentative, uncertain, as though it were still gathering itself, still finding its shape. It was unlike anything the audience had heard before. There was no structure they recognized, no rhythm that fit into their expectations. The sound was more than just notes. It was an invitation, a question, a promise. As the melody blossomed, it grew bold. The soft raindrops became rolling thunder. Each note felt like a storm gathering strength, the crescendo rising like wind rushing through a storm-tossed sky. Amara's hands moved with quiet certainty, as though the music had chosen her, and not the other way around. She wasn't playing a known composition. No Bach, no Beethoven, no jazz standards, no classical arrangement. This was something entirely new, something no one could name, but everyone could feel. The music poured from her, flowing in waves of emotion, like the pull of the ocean against the shore. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about technical prowess. It was raw. It was unfiltered. It was the sound of Amara's soul, her experiences, her hopes, her grief, her triumphs. All of it poured into the keys. As the music swirled and ebbed, the crowd went silent. They held their breath, unsure of what to make of it at first. There were no obvious melodies, no familiar rhythms to anchor them. The sound didn't fit into any category they knew, but that was the beauty of it. Amara's song didn't need to be understood. It just needed to be felt. The notes surged upward, rising like waves in a storm. There was fire in the music now, sharp, powerful, and alive. It was as if each note were a flame, flickering, fighting, reaching for something high. Then just as quickly, the music softened again, melting into something tender, something aching. The raindrops returned, gentle, but no longer uncertain. They had become something else entirely, a pattern, a heartbeat. In that moment, the audience began to hear, not just the piano, but the space between the notes, the silences, the places where the music didn't go, but still echoed in the mind, in the heart, the places where the rain had soaked into the earth, and yet something was growing, something that couldn't be named, only felt. Some in the audience wiped their eyes, overcome by an emotion they couldn't explain. The music had taken them somewhere they didn't even know they were missing. It had touched something deep inside them, an emotion they hadn't known they were carrying. Others sat frozen, caught in the current of the sound. They couldn't look away, even if they tried. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loudly, as if the very act of exhaling might break the spell. And then there was Victor. He had been standing backstage, sipping champagne, as he watched Amara's performance with a mix of smugness and casual indifference. He had expected a mistake, perhaps a falter or an awkward stumble. After all, how could someone like her, a blind girl with no formal training, possibly hold her own on the same stage as him? He had prepared himself for a spectacle, but as the first few notes of Amara's music floated into the air, something in him shifted. The arrogance he had carried for so long cracked, just a little. The sound was nothing like the controlled, immaculate precision he was used to. It was messy, it was wild, but it was alive. Victor's fingers tightened around his champagne flute, his jaw clenching as the music swelled. He set the glass down, his usual cocky grin, replaced by a look of deep confusion. For the first time in years,
The great Victor Dubois didn't understand the music. He had no reference for it. There were no rules, no structure. It wasn't played with mastery, it was played with soul. His mind raced to find a way to dissect it. Was it wrong? Was it chaotic? No, it was something else entirely. Something that made his finely tuned ear ache with its purity. It was as though Amara was playing not to impress, not to show off technique, but to speak, to share, to feel. Victor could hear every emotion Amara had poured into the piano, the joy, the sorrow, the uncertainty, the hope. It was all there. The music was a story, a map of her heart. As the final note faded into the silence of the hall, it wasn't just the end of a song, it was the beginning of something larger. Amara sat back, her fingers still hovering above the keys, feeling the last echoes of her creation reverberating through the air. And in that silence, the world understood. They didn't need to know what the song was called. They didn't need to analyze, they had felt it. The audience erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, thunderous, but Amara didn't hear it. She didn't need to. The music had already done its job. The rain, the storm, the sunrises and sunsets, they had all been heard. Victor stood frozen, his hands still clenched at his sides. His heart was pounding in his chest, a knot of emotions swirling inside him. This wasn't a victory, it wasn't a defeat either, it was a lesson. As the last note of Amara's song lingered in the air, a profound silence fell over the hall. For a few moments, it felt like time itself had frozen. The music had wrapped itself around the room, threading its way through every heart, leaving everyone breathless. There was no applause, no sound except the lingering echo of what had just been played. Then, like a thunderclap breaking the stillness, the audience erupted. It was the loudest standing ovation the New Orleans Grand Music Gala had ever witnessed. The roar of applause filled the entire theater, the clapping ringing out like a storm. People were on their feet shouting, cheering, some wiping away tears. The energy in the room surged with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. It wasn't just appreciation for the performance, it was recognition of something greater. Amara sat at the piano, her hands trembling in the aftermath of the performance. She could feel the vibrations of the applause in the air, the rhythm of it pulsing through her entire being, but she couldn't hear it. She could only feel the weight of her emotions pressing against her. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they weren't from nerves, or fear, or even doubt. They were tears of joy, pure joy. For the first time in her life, Amara understood that she had been seen, not because she could see with her eyes, but because she had spoken with her heart. The moment was hers, and nothing could take it away. It wasn't about the critics, or the fame. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about the music, the raw, unfiltered, unspoken language that connected her to the world. Outside the theater, word spread like wildfire. The next day, news outlets, radio stations, and television networks across the globe replayed her performance. The footage went viral, shared across social media, and watched by millions of people who were as captivated by Amara's music as the audience in the hall had been. Music critics, stunned by the emotional depth of her performance, declared her the spirit of music. They couldn't quite label what she had done, but they didn't need to. No one could argue with what they had witnessed. Amara had become a symbol of the power of authenticity, the power of music that came from the soul, not the technique. Famous musicians called her an inspiration. Classical pianists and jazz legends alike marveled at how she could transform sound into something that resonated so deeply with the human experience. But amidst the storm of praise, there was one person who remained silent: Victor Dubois, the man who had mocked her, the man who had spent years in the spotlight, where every performance was a triumph, every note perfect. He was silent in the wake of Amara's triumph, refusing interviews, hiding from the press, and turning away from the attention he so often sought. His reputation as a genius had been shaken, not by a rival pianist or a critic, but by a blind girl with an old keyboard. The thought gnawed at him. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about that song. The rawness, the honesty, the way it had gripped him so deeply that he'd lost his grip on everything he knew about music. The days passed, and though Amara basked in the newfound attention, she never lost sight of why she played in the first place. She didn't care about fame, she didn't care about the interviews, or the accolades. She cared about the music. She was simply grateful that people understood. A week after the gala, Amara was at home, her grandmother beside her, when a small envelope arrived, addressed in elegant handwriting. The letter inside was simple, yet it carried with it a weight that Amara could immediately feel. The name on the front was unmistakable. Victor Dubois. She opened the envelope and unfolded the note inside. The handwriting was neat, precise, the words chosen with care. The message was short, but it carried an undeniable sincerity. You reminded me what music is. Victor. Amara's fingers traced the words slowly, the weight of the note sinking. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with understanding. In that moment, she realized something that she had known deep down all along. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone, not even to Victor Dubois. She had done what she came to do. She had shared her soul through music, and the world had responded. In the years that followed, Amara's career flourished. Her name became known far and wide, not because she fit into the traditional molds of classical or jazz, or any genre, but because she had found her own voice. She played all over the world, touching people in ways that only true artists could. Her music transcended language, culture, and expectation. And then one fateful night, she stood at the grand piano of Carnegie Hall in New York City, about to perform one of the most important concerts of her life. The audience was packed, the air thick with anticipation. As Amara walked to the piano, she did something unexpected. She reached up and with a steady hand, blindfolded herself. The room fell silent. Some were puzzled, others watched with curiosity. But Amara was calm, her mind and heart in perfect harmony with the music that would soon flow from her hands. As her fingers touched the keys, she closed her eyes. She could feel every note, every vibration. The music had always been her eyes. It had always seen her for who she was. And now, blindfolded by choice, Amara proved to the world that sight might guide the eyes, but music sees with the heart. And in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Amara Johnson didn't just prove a point. She shifted the way the world sees talent, potential, and possibility. In a world obsessed with appearances and expectations, Amara taught us that greatness doesn't always come in the form we expect. It doesn't always follow the script, the rules, or the well-worn path. From the very beginning, Amara had no choice but to see the world differently. Born blind, she couldn't rely on sight like others. But that limitation didn't define her. It shaped. She didn't need sight to see people's pain, to understand their emotions, or to connect with the very essence of music. While others might have been searching for their way through the world with their eyes, Amara used her other senses, her intuition, her heart, her soul. She felt music deeply, not just as sound, but as a force that spoke to her, a language that needed no translation. Her music became a bridge. It wasn't about technical perfection, but about speaking the truth of the human experience, joy, sorrow, hope, and longing. And when she played, the world listened.
Amara didn't need eyes to see the emotions of others. She could hear their silent struggles in the way the world felt through the vibrations of the earth, through the sounds of life unfolding. Her piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a way of communicating, of connecting with people on a level that words couldn't reach. Her performance wasn't just a song, it was an invitation to feel, to experience, to reflect. And perhaps most importantly, Amara didn't need anyone's approval to shine. In a world that so often demands conformity, Amara's strength lay in her ability to stand apart. She didn't play for validation, she didn't play for applause, she played because she had to. The music poured out of her, not because it was expected, but because it was true. It was her truth. What Victor Dubois once saw as weakness, the fact that Amara was blind, turned out to be her greatest strength. It was her connection to a deeper well of understanding, a kind of wisdom that transcended the superficial. In his arrogance, he had mocked her, not understanding that the very thing he thought made her lesser was the key to her greatness. Amara's blindness wasn't a barrier, it was a gift that allowed her to hear the world in ways that others could never comprehend. Her journey was one of transformation, not just for herself, but for the world around her. She went from being mocked by the man who had thought he was untouchable, to becoming the master of her craft. Her music became a voice for those who had been overlooked, for those whose stories had been silenced. She went from being dismissed as just another aspiring artist, to becoming unforgettable, a legend whose name would be known for generations to come. Amara's story isn't just about music, it's about something deeper. It's about what's possible when faith outshines fear. It's about how resilience can turn adversity into strength, and how courage can transform what seems like a disadvantage into an advantage. It's about daring to listen, not just to the voices we're used to hearing, but to the unheard, the unseen, and the underestimated. Amara didn't just teach the world about the power of music. She taught us that we don't have to see to understand. We don't have to be what others expect us to be. And sometimes the greatest strength comes from the very thing we are told makes us weak. Her story is one of courage, hope, and unwavering belief in her own worth. And in the end, it's a reminder to all of us. Greatness isn't about fitting into someone else's mold. It's about embracing who we truly are and daring to let the world hear us. Did Amara's journey touch your heart? Then let's keep this story alive. If you believe that talent knows no boundaries, hit that like button to show your support for those who dare to be different. We all know someone who needs a reminder of their worth. Share this video with them. Let's inspire those who feel unseen or underestimated. Amara's story is proof that the world doesn't get to decide our value. We do. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories, both real and fictional, that stir the soul and spark the spirit. This is just the beginning. In the comments, we'd love to hear from you. What's your Amara moment? That moment when someone doubted you and you proved them wrong. Share your story with us, and let's keep the conversation going. The world needs more than just noise. It needs truth. It needs you. So remember, keep listening, not just to the sounds but to the deeper truths beneath them. That's where the real music begins. Until next time, keep embracing the power of your own unique voice.